me. I'm Kirsty Darkins. I am a commercial property surveyor and an investor. So I've been investing for the last 4 years, but I've been a surveyor for 20 years. And I've been meaning to come to Ming for a really long time.
I've got you. I've got you eventually.
You know what it's like, your diary gets really busy and you can't get to everything you want to get to. So this is a fantastic opportunity for me. So hello to anybody that I don't know. I think I do know quite a few of you that are on the call. And I am building a commercial property portfolio for myself. I source a few deals for other investors, and I'm mentoring other investors who want to learn about commercial. Because it's a great thing to diversify your portfolio into if you're in resi. And where I always start with that conversation is the government have really hit residential landlords quite hard with additional taxes in the last few years. And there are more and more private investors starting to look at commercial, but often they feel that it's out of their reach, or they just really don't know what they're doing. And so they don't get into it. But that's one of the good reasons to get into it, is because there isn't as much competition. There are far fewer private landlords working in that space, and all the bigger funds, so your pensions, your institutions, your big developers, they're not looking at what we'll be looking at, which is usually 2 million and below, and often a lot lower than that. But commercial is also a lot more than just shops and uppers. So a lot of people are interested in getting into mixed use, which can be a really good thing to do. It really does diversify risk. But there's a lot more to commercial than just high street shops. So in terms of the benefits of investing in commercial property, longer, more secure income stream, question mark at the moment, obviously, with some investment, but, you know, the government are trying to shore us up. This help has never been there before. I went through the 2008 recession when I was asset managing shopping centres, which was quite a car crash. But we came out of it, and shopping centres are still trading and thriving. And if we can come out of 2008, where there was no government help for businesses, I'm quite sure we can come out of this. So I have a largely retail portfolio myself at the moment, and I'm not overly worried. My tenants are still paying rent. They've all paid rent up to date. We've got good relationships with them. And it's going to be a partnership of us working together to keep them open and trading longer term, even if in the short term it means we might have to agree some rent holidays. We haven't had to yet. But so usually secure long-term income. So the average lease length in the UK for commercial is 8 years. You often get a lot more rent from a far fewer properties. So you need a smaller portfolio if you're investing in commercial. So you'll only need a handful of properties to get you to your income goals, rather than having a huge portfolio. The tenant does most of the work with commercial property, which is what I like the most. So with resi, there's a big long list of what we're responsible for as landlords. With commercial, the tenant is responsible for most things. So they're responsible for maintaining the property. Usually they'll go in and do the work to refurbish it as well. So it's not common for commercial landlords to refurbish property. You just build that into the agreement. And there's no compliance for you to be responsible for as a landlord. The tenant's responsible for all of that. Debt collection is a lot quicker and easier. And commercial does tend to bounce faster than residential because you're not reliant on consumer sentiment. What we find is that it hits the bottom quicker and comes back up quicker, partly because it's valued on a quarterly basis. So the valuations will be done in June. That will be most of the bad news. And then in September will be the rest of the bad news. And then everything will be rebased and we'll be ready to go again. And there's a lot of liquidity in the commercial market. There's a lot of people throwing money at it. So those are some of the good reasons. Another good reason is that you can force appreciation. So what I mean by that is that in residential, we're only as good as the last house that sold in our street or the last HMO that was in our locality. In commercial, you're a bit more master of your own destiny, or mistress, because you can force the appreciation, because all the value in commercial property is in the lease and the tenant. So commercial property doesn't really have a bricks and mortar value. It's all about security of the income stream of that property. So if you're buying commercial property, even if you're buying it to convert and it's vacant, you're in a really, really strong position in terms of negotiating the price, because it's not worth anything else at the moment, particularly if it doesn't have planning on it. Now, retail, high street. So is the high street dead? Well, there's $1 million question. So people have been telling me that the high street is dead for about 15 years. I've always worked in retail property as well as industrial, and it's never died, it's just evolved. And retail is ever evolving, and we've still only got 20% of shopping done online. Now that's obviously gone up at the moment, but I fully expect it to come back down again. There will always be a need for convenience and service-led services. So anything that's Amazon proof basically is what you need to be investing in on the high street. So all your services like opticians, dentists, hairdressers, takeaways, charity shops are a really good one. They get a lot of backing. They don't have to pay business rates. They don't pay their staff, so they can afford to pay more rent. That's why there's so many of them on the high street. Obviously supermarkets, pharmacies, all of that really still works on the high street and in suburban parades where you're quite a long way from town in the middle of a residential area. That's never going to go away. The need for that will never go away. Retail will shrink, and this is just going to accelerate it. So in the industry, we think retail needs to shrink by 30 to 40% of its current volume to be sustainable in the future. But what is good about the coronavirus crisis is it's making people think differently. People are looking to their local communities. People are starting to think about, well, actually, could I work from home? And people are starting to use their small local shops. So actually, quite a lot of good could probably come out of this. And I was on a call last week with some other surveyors and investors, and actually a couple of occupiers. So I had Costa on and Barclays Bank. And they were all saying that, so Costa, and this should give you some security in terms of, yes, but now is not the time to get into commercial. Well, Costa are not changing their acquisition plan at all, other than to pivot some of their focus away from drive-through and back to the high street and community, because they think people will want it more than ever. So I thought that was quite interesting. And we also came to the conclusion that one of the things that we can do to repurpose some of the high street is to create click and collect hubs. So there isn't nearly enough capacity in apartment blocks or in people's homes for convenience for parcel delivery. So if we could have more click and collect hubs, then that would mean that high street businesses could partner with online businesses to provide collection hubs. And that is one way they could create a different revenue stream and support their occupation costs. I also think there's going to be a lot more demand for either serviced offices or co-working coming out of this, but not your big players in all the city centres, but smaller hubs around where people actually live in the suburbs. And I do think there will be a requirement for that. So that's something else that could come out of this. So I think there's a lot going on the high street. You definitely always need to take professional advice when you're getting into commercial. But the high street very definitely isn't dead, and there's a lot of opportunities coming through. I've got some deals coming through now where the vendors are willing to agree terms on a conditional basis that says that if the retailer goes into administration, puts forward a CVA, or doesn't reopen for trade in the next 6 months, then they'll happily renegotiate the deal. So, you know, we can still be doing deals, we just might not complete on them as soon. And then in commercial, a lot of people don't think of industrial because it's not very sexy. You know, it's all grey boxes and tin sheds, and what's sexy about a tin crinkly roof? Well, the numbers are quite sexy. So I really like industrial, and a lot more people should be looking at industrial. It's a lot more stable than the retail market, a lot less volatile, and all the people that have gone off the high street and online need somewhere to store their goods, to do their logistics from. There's a lot of people looking for workshops. Industrial development as well is a good one to do, because it's much cheaper to develop industrial than it is residential, and a lot quicker. So there's a lot of opportunity in commercial. And a lot of the time, you don't really need that much knowledge yourself if you employ a professional surveyor. You can employ a professional surveyor to act on your behalf to acquire property investments, and not a lot of people think of it that way. So yes, they sell property, but they also acquire on behalf of clients. So they'll charge you 1 to 1.5% of the purchase price, for example, to do that. And then you've got a fully de-risked purchase because you've got a professional surveyor doing all the due diligence and the analysis, helping you get over the line. So I hope that's given you some ideas of why you might want to think about commercial as an investment. And I think I'm just going to open it up to see what questions people have got, really.
There are a couple of questions on there though. We've got one from Mandy. He's saying, Kirsty, how do you know there's retail demands when the shops are closing in the town centres at the moment?
Yeah, so the number one answer to most questions on commercial property is local commercial surveyors. So you need to have relationships with local commercial surveyors because they are the ones with their ear to the ground. They know what's going on in the market. They're doing all the lettings and the sales. They're on top of what's happening with the businesses. So you talk to local commercial surveyors is how you get on top of what the demand is, what the appetite is. You also look at how much vacancy there is in that high street. And obviously, if there's a lot of vacancy, it's probably not somewhere you want to invest for retail. It might be somewhere you want to look at for converting it or repurposing it for another use. The other thing to do, which granted you can't do right now, but when we go back to some semblance of normality, the other thing that us surveyors always do, and I always suggest that investors do, is we pose as a potential business taking space in that high street, and we go into other shops along the street and just have a chat with them about how long have you been here, how do you trade, you know, how many businesses have you seen set up recently, how many have you seen close, and you wouldn't believe the information that people give you.
Okay, what kind of returns do you get, Kirsty? I mean, to whet the appetite of some people who invest in residential, on commercial, what kind of returns are you looking
at? 9% and above. So most of what I do is 12% and above because I'm willing to do some asset management and add some value. But if you just wanted to go in and place your money and buy yourself some income for a few years without having to do anything at all, 8.5%, 9%, 10%.
Okay, cool. Question of Anthony at Halliburton. Am I right in thinking if commercial properties are unoccupied for 3 months, that you're still liable for business rates?
Yes. So the thing with business rates is that you get empty rates relief for 3 months with retail from the date that it's empty. So you don't have to pay rates for 3 months, but then after that you do have to pay rates. With industrial, it's 6 months, but there are ways to mitigate it. And again, this is where you need to be involved with commercial surveyors because they're the ones that are going to tell you how to mitigate it. There's various ways you can mitigate it. And the thing people need to not get tripped up with at the moment is that whilst occupiers have got retail and hospitality occupiers have got a 12-month rates holiday, that does not apply to landlords. So if you've got a vacant retail property, you've still got to pay the business rates. That holiday doesn't apply. So I think a lot of people have got excited thinking, oh, I can go and snap up a load of retail vacant property and I won't have any rates to pay. Well, you will.
Right, okay. Question from Matt. Great overview, Kirsty. What are your views on newcomers into commercial gaining leverage from the banks? I hear that it's an uphill battle. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it can be. So if you've got no experience in commercial, what you want to do is joint venture with somebody who has, or you want to instruct a commercial surveyor to act on your behalf. Because if the banks know that you've got a commercial surveyor acting on your behalf, then they're a lot more open to lending to you. Plus, don't go to the high street banks. So the high street banks are not the ones to start with if you want to get into commercial. There are specialist commercial lenders. So use a broker and they will be able to find someone who's willing to lend to you. Now, you might find that as a first-time commercial investor, you won't get the maximum loan to value. So you might have to put a bit more of your own cash in. Generally, you can only go up to 70% loan to value on commercial anyway. I tend to try and stick at 60% because you always want to keep that equity buffer in your investments. Particularly with retail at the moment, you know, the appetite for retail from lenders is going to be 50–60% at most for quite a while. So you want to be using private money where you can, to take the opportunities that are going to come up the rest of this year, is what I would say. But yeah, you also need to expect interest rates to be higher. They're always higher in commercial anyway. But if you're starting out, you're going to be looking at 6%, 5.5–6%. For your commercial finance, and then as you build your portfolio, you'll get down to more like 3.5–4%. But it will never be the rates that you get on resi. That's just the way that commercial works. But you want to go with people like Shawbrook, Aldermore, Handelsbanken. There's a couple of new entrants as well, and this is why you want to work with a commercial broker, because they'll be able to find you someone that, as a first-time commercial investor, particularly if they like it if you've got buy-to-let experience. So if you've got previous buy-to-let investments and you're moving into commercial, they can see that you've got a professional instructed, or you're working with another investor who's got a commercial background, then they will see you as a credible prospect.
Cool. Last one I think we've got here from Jazzy Sidhu as well. Kirsty, what direction do you think the banks will take with commercial lending? Most prior to COVID-19 require 35–40% deposits from your challenger banks. Do you think they will stick to these LTVs, or will they start requiring larger deposits? Also, do capital repayments on commercial due to the risk of a massive depreciation if the tenant leaves?
So I think the banks will still lend, but yeah, the loan to values are going to go down for a while, and it will depend what sector. So if you're investing in industrial, loan to values aren't going to go anywhere, because industrial's sailing through this. It's not volatile. Industrial is a sound investment. So it depends what you're investing in. If you're trying to invest in retail or hospitality, yes, the loan to values are going to go down. So like I said, they're not going to want to lend more than 50–60% on retail for a while. And that's why I work with private investors. I don't use banks if I can help it, if I'm honest. I just try to use private money because it's a lot easier.
Yeah, that also includes pensions as well. I think that a lot of people don't realise that you can use pensions for commercial.
Yeah, really good point. Yeah, so you can use your SIP or your SAS pension to invest in commercial property. And I see a lot of people trying to use their pensions to do things it's not meant for, largely commercial to resi conversions, which is possible, but it's very complicated. And it takes a long time before you see any profit back, you know. So I'm all about keeping life simple. So for me, if you've got a pension in a SIP or a SAS, then why aren't you investing in commercial property as an investment? Because it's a very sound thing to do, and you've got a ready-made fund sat there.
Last but not least, well, this one just one from me as well. I know that you work closely with John as well. How are you finding that at the moment? Because obviously you can't do any. Well, have you come off site? Has that stopped?
Well, actually, he's sitting right next to me.
Hello. Good morning, John.
So we have actually just been to a site.
Okay.
We're looking at a couple of grade 2 listed buildings to do a redevelopment on. One's a pub, one's a workshop, and they're vacant, so obviously there's no one there, and we decided that we needed to get some more photos and videos to work with our planners and architects, so we've just been out and done that today. So we're still cracking on. We've got a number of projects. To be honest, we're working with our investors mostly at the moment and looking at planning and project planning, doing all the planning we can do, working with our investors to make sure we've got the funds ready. And then I'm also talking to agents constantly about what we're looking for. So as and when opportunities come through, they'll come to us. So yeah, we're still carrying on. John's also been on site doing projects for investors where the properties are vacant. He's just started one with his team this morning. There's going to be a conversion. So, you know, things are still happening where it's possible. The world hasn't stopped.